How you doing? Welcome. I'm so excited to be here tonight and introducing this conversation between Laurie Wallmark, a really talented picture book writer, and Marjorie Kyler, another incredibly talented picture book writer. Her work I'm sure that you know. My name is Margaret. I'm one of the booksellers at Labyrinth, and I work a lot in the children's section, which is very dear to my heart. So before we begin, there's just a few quick things we should go through. The first one is just that I want to say thank you to the host, the Princeton Public Library. They've hosted many of our events with us, and it's a wonderful partnership. And to let you know a couple of quick things about the system here, you'll see down at the bottom of your screen down there, there's a green button. And if you click that, you'll be able to order Laurie's book, which we'll be discussing tonight, and get your 10% off. You can also, of course, come into the store or give us a call, mention that you were part of this event, and you will get your 10%. There's also a Ask a Question feature. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen as well. If you would, as you have thoughts coming into your head while you're listening to our discussion, if there's a question you'd like to ask of either of these wonderful women, you can put that question in the Ask a Question feature, and we'll get to those at the end of the event. Please don't use the chat over to the side for that. We're all going to stop looking at that in just a minute and just hone in on this conversation here. So that's all the sort of business stuff, I think. I'm going to quickly introduce Laurie and Marjorie, and then I will let them take it away. So Laurie Wallmark, who is the subject of the discussion we're having tonight, began her career as a software engineer and a professor of computer science. Luckily for us, she moved on to writing picture books, which are largely biographical works of women in the STEM fields. Often women that you might not have heard about, but sometimes women you have heard about who you just didn't know certain things about. My favorite of her books is one about Hedy Lamarr, where I found out all kinds of things I did not previously know. But I think that her most recent book may be even more exciting to me, the one we will hear about tonight. I just finished reading it a second time to my daughter, who was really excited and previously not very interested in the sciences, so good work. So Laurie has won a number of awards and honors for her work. She's had starred trade reviews and won a Best STEM Book Award, a Crystal Kite Award, and we're just really excited to have her here tonight. And she'll be chatting with Marjorie Kyler, who I'm almost sure some of you know at least one of her books. Every Halloween we pull out Bonaparte Falls Apart, and it has pride of place in our Halloween display. But most recently, she's also written a follow-up book to that one, and a book called Snow Friends, which you might not be surprised to hear sold very well this year because we had so much snow. So she's also been an editor at Henry Holt and Company, and it's just wonderful to have both of you here tonight. And I think we're going to begin, Laurie, with you reading a little bit from your book. Is that right?
Almost right. We're going to begin with a lot of thank yous.
Okay.
So the first thank you is to Labyrinth Books and to the Princeton Public Library for having me. Next to Marjorie for helping me, with this event. I made a list. See, made a list so I don't forget anyone, like in the Oscars. What's a picture book without pictures? So my amazing illustrator, Brooke Smart. And when I'm reading the book and you look at some of the illustrations and you see those ribbons with letters on them, those are codes. I gave Brooke the letters. She hand wrote all those letters. Amazing. I have two great agents, Liza Fleizik and Ginger Harris Donson, who helped me make the book the best it could be, and then matched it with the perfect editor. And that perfect editor was Meredith Mundy. And this is my third book I've done with Meredith. So thank you, Meredith. But also thank you everyone on the Abrams team. A lot of time people don't realize how much work a publisher does for you. The art director, the copy editors, the fact checkers, the publisher, the publicity, the marketing, everyone did a lot of work to get this book out into the world. But before any of this happened, the book had to be written. And so I'm in 2 critique groups. I'm in one with Marjorie called the Yentas, but I think I joined the group after this book was written, so she didn't see it ahead of time. And another critique group called the Squirrels, because look, a squirrel! We get distracted easily. I have 2 beta readers, Jean Balsam and my husband, Toby Wallmark. So the saying that it takes a village to write a picture book, absolutely. So now I'm going to read the picture book. So let's see if I can share the screen with you. Hold on. Share screen. Okay, I am screen sharing.
Perfect.
Okay, here we go. So it's Codebreaker Spy Hunter, How Elizebeth Friedman Changed the Course of 2 World Wars. Words by Laurie Wallmark, art by Brooke Smart. Okay, so look at that ribbon and all those letters that are just look like random letters that Brooke had to write by hand. Amazing. Anyway, here we go. I'm only going to read an excerpt of the book because it's pretty long. So here we go. Could it be? Had enemy spies, whoops, let me change the page here. Had enemy spies sneaked into the United States? The country had not yet entered World War II, but had the war now come to American soil? The Federal Bureau of Investigation had intercepted hundreds of coded messages from a secret base in New York, but couldn't read them. Someone had to crack the code. But who? The FBI turned to one special woman to decipher the secret messages. Elizebeth Smith Friedman, a cryptanalyst with a stellar reputation, agreed to work with the FBI on their top secret project. And once she'd broken the codes, she discovered the senders were indeed spies, Nazis. At the trial, the content of those deciphered messages provided the hard evidence needed to send 33 German spies to prison. According to the FBI, Elizebeth's work resulted in the greatest spy roundup in American history. And to think, if not for a chance encounter with a librarian more than 25 years earlier, Elizebeth might never have become a code breaker at all. Okay, so now we're going to skip the entire middle of the book. We're going to go, she's going to become a code breaker. She breaks codes during World War I. During Prohibition, we get into World War II. She's helping to capture spies, rumrunners, and then comes the German Enigma machine that you may have heard of, the supposedly unbreakable Enigma. And that's where we pick up again. Just when it seemed Elizebeth and her team would never beat Enigma, they got a lucky break. A lazy Enigma operator didn't bother changing the start position of the wheels for each new message. The machine produced the same alphabet over and over again. This was the opportunity Elizebeth's group needed. It wasn't easy and took months of work, but Elizabeth's team finally broke the supposedly unbreakable Enigma codes. Because of wartime secrecy, they didn't know that others, such as a British team led by now famous codebreaker Alan Turing, had also broken the codes. It was a bad time for the Nazis. How had Americans found out so many of their military secrets? Everyone knew the Enigma code was unbeatable. It was as if someone were eavesdropping on the Nazi conversations. Oops. And in a way, Elizebeth and her team were doing just that. German secret messages were no longer secret. Decoded transmissions gave the military advance warning of the Nazis' planned attacks and bombing raids. Historians are certain that by breaking the Enigma codes, Elizebeth and the other code breakers in allied countries around the world saved thousands of lives and shortened the war by many years. Elizabeth knew how important it was to keep her work hush-hush. After all, lives depended on the enemy not knowing what she was doing. Because of this, the government classified all her work top secret ultra and placed it under lock and key in the National Archives. They threatened to put Elizabeth in jail if she spoke about her accomplishments, even to her husband, her children, or her 6 grandchildren. The government made her swear she would never tell anyone, and she never did. The last of Elizabeth's secrets were finally declassified in 2015, 35 years after her death. Elizabeth was a true heroine of both World War I and World War II. She is now considered one of the most gifted and influential code breakers of all time. Yet no one knew how many codes she broke, how many Nazis she stopped, how many American lives she saved, until now. And I'm just putting this last slide up because afterwards, if you have any questions, you want to get in touch with me for anything, everywhere, on every platform. Luckily for me, you can just look for Laurie Wallmark. You don't have to, find any special codes or anything like that. It's always Laurie Wallmark, and I'm always happy to hear from people. So I'm going to stop sharing and get back to, there we are, back to Marjorie.
Okay, when you were reading just now, a question came up in my mind.
Okay.
Which is that I gathered during World War II, Elizabeth created a code-breaking unit, but there weren't that many people she could recruit because there weren't many cryptanalysts. And so I gather she hired mathematicians, physicists, and
you can do it, Marjorie.
Physicists, I'm glad I don't lisp, and chemists, because they think analytically and they could be trained easily. But my question is, after this team was able to decipher these incredibly enigmatic codes, it seems like the FBI took credit for deciphering the codes and ignored Elizabeth's contribution. So, this book has kind of a feminist tone to it with good reason. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Let's start with the FBI taking credit. So Elizabeth formed the team. She trained the members of the team. They broke codes, the biggest spy roundup in history, according to the FBI. And she was not part of the FBI. At that time, I think she was still under the Coast Guard mantle. But they gave no credit. The FBI basically said, we did this. We broke this wonderful code. And he who shall not be named, and I did not name in the book, took all the credit. Was that because she was a woman? In this case, I think it's more because he always took the credit. But other things had that feminist air to it. Her husband was also a cryptanalyst. They learned code breaking together. They originally in World War I started working together, but eventually they went their separate ways. And he was very successful, which is great. But she was more successful. And when the NSA built an auditorium, they named it after him.
And that's maybe why we haven't learned that much about her and why your book is so important. It really shines light on a person who is incredibly talented, but really didn't get the attention that she deserved till more recently. So you've done a wonderful service to all of us by writing this book. And it's also very interesting because there's a lot of primary source material that's kind of hand lettered and woven into the artwork so that you really get a feeling for what Elizebeth was like and what she was contending with. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your background, Laurie,
Okay.
because you are a scientist, right?
Right. I'm a computer scientist. Yes.
So in that sense, is that partly why you were attracted to this subject?
It's why I'm attracted to writing about women in STEM, because I love science and math. And I'm also dedicated to making sure all these unsung heroes of underrepresented minorities, like women, are seen. The anecdote I like to say is that when I was a kid, I thought you had to be named Marie Curie to be a woman scientist, because that was the only one I knew. I mean, truly, I knew of no other woman scientist other than Marie Curie. And luckily, that's changing now. A lot of great books are coming out about women scientists and other underrepresented minorities in the sciences and math.
Well, when did you get it into your head that you wanted to write a children's book? When did that? Because you had a distinguished career as a teacher.
Okay.
Professor.
Unlike most of my fellow kidlit writers, I didn't write, especially as a kid. We didn't have creative writing in school, certainly. I wrote some songs, I wrote some poetry. That was about it. I didn't journal or diary, or we didn't call it journaling back then. Nothing, never occurred to me. And about 15, 20 years ago, I had an idea for a middle grade book. And I love reading middle grade books. I adore middle grade books. I thought, I'll give it a try. I took classes, I took workshops. I read a lot of books about writing middle grade books. I wrote one. It didn't sell, luckily. And so I thought, okay, I'm not a writer. So I stopped writing. Then about 5 years later, I had an idea for another middle grade book and went through the same thing, classes and books. But this time, while I was waiting to hear back about the book that also didn't sell, I wrote other books. And that really is the key, that you can't pin all your hopes on just, one book, because your first book is very unlikely to sell. Second book, unlikely to sell. Often third, fourth, fifth, not to be negative here. I had to learn my craft. I was not an English major. I majored in biochemistry undergraduate and computers graduate school. I did business writing. That's very different than creative writing.
Well, how long did it take you to actually have a book accepted? You mentioned a middle grade novel, but did you have an agent? Did you just send it out blindly to various editors?
I sent it out. Being the person I am, I'm very logical, very left brain. So I kept an Excel spreadsheet of all the books I sent out to all the agents, to all the editors. And until I got an agent, and I'll come back to getting the agent, until I got an agent, I had sent out over 500 submissions. Now, this is not to depress people, because remember, I was coming from nothing. I didn't write as a kid. I didn't do creative writing as a kid, other than, poetry and songs. I had a lot to learn. A lot to learn. In terms of getting how I got an agent, those of you out there who are interested in writing for children, you should belong, let's try that sentence again, to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI. The professional organization and their conferences. Those of you who are here in New Jersey, until recently, we would have a yearly conference in June. And at one of those yearly conferences, at the time, I was assistant regional advisor. So I was busy, arranging and making sure this went okay and that went okay and everything was going okay. And there was a cocktail party that evening, and I was taking tickets for the cocktail party. That bit, got everyone into the cocktail party, and I just went, back on, a seat. I was done. I was exhausted. And Ginger, remember Ginger of Thank You, Liza and Ginger? I was supposed to have had a critique with Ginger, which I just totally missed because I was so busy. I missed it. So she and Liza came by, and, I'm still sort of, out on the couch, I'm sitting up barely. And they said, you missed your critique, but we really liked your story. Would you be interested in revising it? We have an editor we think might be interested in it. So, of course, I was interested in revising it. They sent it to Marissa Moss of Creston Books, who is an amazing editor, just like Meredith Mundy is. There's something like MM, maybe those initials in your name make you an amazing editor. Anyway, I did about 4 or 5 revisions for Marissa, and then Liza emailed and said, can we talk? And I was very confused. Did I have an agent? What if Marissa didn't want it? Would Liza send it out other places? I had no idea what was going on, and I was too timid to ask. Do not be like me. Do not be that way. Ask. So Liza called. Go on.
The book.
That was my Ada Byron Lovelace and the Thinking Machine, my debut book. And Liza says, how would you like to be published by Creston Books? So I said, well, I would not have done all these revisions if I didn't want to be published. I had no idea she was saying, you are going to be published by Creston Books. What can I say? I sometimes miss these human cues that people give. So I got an agent and the first book deal directly as a result of, I always say as a critique at the conference, but I didn't actually have the critique because I missed the critique, but theoretically as a result of the critique. And just as an aside, my second book, which is with Meredith Mundy, who is the editor for my current book, I had a critique with her at another SCBWI conference. And she liked the book so much, that became my second book, directly as a result. And yeah, that would help if I were better at selling and telling the names of books. That was Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code.
Oh, yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
a good. So really what you're saying is if you are really serious about getting a book published and your heart's in it, and it would just be the most wonderful thing in the whole world, you are suggesting that authors network, go to conferences, meet editors and those who are presenting.
Right. But it's not a magic bullet because remember, I was assistant regional advisor. I knew so many editors and agents. I knew Marjorie for a very long time. I knew Marjorie. Sent Marjorie a book. She didn't buy it, but that's okay.
I know. You're so happy the trajectory of your career. You've just done the amazing books. I learned so much from them. And as I said, you're making a tremendous contribution to the field.
Right, but the networking is really, whoops, you cut out a little bit, Marjorie, so I can just talk over you since you cut out.
I'll get close. Yeah, my microphone's not working so well. But anyway, I'm just saying, you've just had this wonderful career and you've contributed so much to the field, unearthing these amazing women.
It's fun finding.
I'm going to interrupt you guys very briefly. We've lost the screen for both of you. We still have the sound, but
that's interesting because I see both of us.
Well, we're not seeing it, I think, on the other end.
Okay, and the chat has come up now, which was hidden before.
Well, that's okay. We'll just try and talk clearly, and you don't have to look at us.
That's right.
A lot to say. So I'm interested, Laurie, in how long have you actually been published?
My first book, Ada Byron Lovelace and the Thinking Machine, see, I said it this time, I remembered, came out in 2015. Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code, came out in 2017. Hedy Lamar's Double Life in 2019. Numbers in Motion, yes, in 2020. And Codebreaker Spy Hunter came out this year. But I'm also breaking out of the mold. I am not just sticking with my, as I call them, my dead women in STEM. I am now breaking out to dead reptiles because I have a fiction picture book coming out in the fall called Dino Pajama Party. And someone said, and that's nonfiction? I felt like saying, oh yes, absolutely. Paleontologists found little bits of pajamas, with little dinos on them when they found the bones. It is not nonfiction.
Oh no, it's very different. And I actually have read the text and looked at the amazing art. And
the art is incredible.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting that you've broken out of the one thing you've proven that you're really good at doing, which is writing about dead women in science. And I think the pandemic's been kind of an interesting interlude for writers, because more and more I'm meeting writers who have said that they're using this time to experiment and to sort of break out of their safety zone.
And I think that's really important. I had someone ask a question about your series of books about women in science. And it's not really a series. I never really thought of it as a series. But to keep your creative juices flowing, it's nice to do other things also.
No, I think you're right. And speaking to that, do you have advice? Do you have any advice you'd like to share with would-be writers, besides the advice that it's helpful to attend conferences and to network? Do you have any advice?
Sure. I periodically teach classes on writing books for children. I haven't done it in a couple of years now, but I always say you need three things. Let's see if I can remember what the three things are. The first one is you need some talent, not a lot of talent. I had no talent in writing, no experience in writing, but you need something. You need a willingness to learn and improve your craft. And I think that is so important. A lot of people, they get one book published and they think, I know what to do. I know how to write it. No, you always need to. I'm taking a course from someone else this weekend. I gave a course last weekend. We're always learning as we write. But the biggest thing you need is persistence, because it's a tough business. There are a lot of people who want to get books published, but many of the people I started out with are now published. Some people have fallen by the wayside and stopped writing. You really need a little bit of a thick skin and that persistence to, if you never send your work out, you are never going to get published. I'd like to put that on a sign for some people, because they're so afraid to send their work out.
But then how important is an agent? Because it seems a lot of publishers are not reading unsolicited manuscripts. They're only going to read manuscripts that are represented by an agent. So what do you do when you're a new writer and you're eager to get published? I mean, does it mean that you can't get published unless you have an agent?
No, but in these same classes, I used to say, as a children's book author, it was not as important to have an agent as it was for adult authors, or authors of adult, we're all adult authors, authors of adult books. I think it is more important now. Now, my first book, the Ada Byron Lovelace book, I could have sent it directly to Creston Books myself. I didn't need an agent to do that. But an agent is more than just matching you with an editor, and getting your book published. Your agent is there every step of the way. Some agents, like mine, are editorial. So they give me feedback on my work before it even goes out, so it has a better chance of getting picked up. Some agents aren't, but more, they can bring up opportunities. An editor might come to them and say, do you know someone who might be interested in doing this? And with an agent can say, I have just the right person who might want to do that.
Okay, so it's certainly helpful. And,
it is helpful. It is not absolutely necessary. One thing I will say, though,
I'd say there are small publishers, who welcome submissions that aren't agented. So
absolutely,
you have to do your homework. You have to go on the internet and find out what those publishers are, who those publishers are, if you haven't figured out, or connected with an agent. So I think the last thing I'll ask you before,
if I want to do one more thing about agents, though, okay? I had an agent for one day previous to my current agents. And the reason it was only one day is I had sent out the book also to publishers, to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 8 publishers. And when the agent found that out, she dropped me, because those were the people she would have sent to. I had done my homework and found the right editors to send it to. So you need to decide, are you sending it, a specific work to agents or to editors? Because once you get past a few editors, you've tied your agent's hands. They can't send it where you sent it. And anyway, that's my word of warning about, agents. You need to choose. Okay, now ask your question.
That's great. No, I was just going to say, before we turn this over to questions from the participants, the last thing is, have you noticed any trends, say in the last 5 years, that would be interesting for the rest of us to hear about?
Right. Oh, let me first talk about trends, and then I will mention the trends. If you do not already subscribe to Publishers Weekly Children's Bookshelf, it's a free newsletter. It comes out twice a week. Get on the Publishers Weekly site and subscribe to it, because you'll see announcements of books coming out. And you'll see reviews of books, you'll see articles, but the announcements of books coming out is what I want to address. You can look at those books and say, oh, this is what editors are looking for. And the answer is no, that's what editors were looking for 2 or 3 years ago. That's not what they're looking for right now. So to write to a trend is wrong in 2 reasons. One, because by the time you finish writing, the trend will have passed. But 2, I always say you need to write your passion. I'm passionate about science and math and unsung hero, underrepresented minorities in those fields. And that's why I write about them. If the trend is daffodils and you couldn't care less about flowers, your book just isn't going to be very good. Okay, so now that I've said you shouldn't follow trends, I can discuss trends that I see. Certainly right now, a lot of graphic novels are coming out, and you do not need to be an illustrator to do a graphic novel. You can be a writer only. A lot of novels in verse are coming out right now. In terms of picture books, which is my sort of natural home, a lot of books about kindness and stewardship of our planet and things like that.
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem, yes. Absolutely. You know, so a lot of almost touchy-feely type books, which we didn't have before, but you know, things they go in waves. And by the time you write your self-esteem book that you think is a great book and probably is a great book, you write it, that wave may be gone. And now we may be writing about, you know, I don't know, something else.
It's so true. But so a certain amount has to do with intuition, where our culture is going.
Right.
And predicting maybe what people will be interested in 2 or 3 years.
I lucked out because my interest in writing about women in STEM predated people writing about women in STEM. So I got in before, you know, everyone else started writing about it. I'm not
right. And as you said, passion's important.
Exactly.
So write something that you're passionate about, even if it's not connected to a trend. If it's just unique in some way, that will capture an editor's attention.
Right, because if you're not interested in it, I got asked early on, I looked into work for hire, and the first time I was contacted, they wanted me to write a book about battleships or something like that. I can't remember now, but it was some military something. It was like, could I write it? Of course I could write it. Should I write it? No. No interest in the field. I do not want to write about battleships. You have to follow what works for you.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. There was a question in here early on that I thought was interesting. Thank you so much to both of you. That was a really fascinating conversation. I saw people mentioning it along the way, how interested they were. Since you're looking at stories that are really important to you, that you're very passionate about, how do you go about finding an illustrator that you think is going to support your work and really help it sort of, fulfill the sensibility that you're trying to address?
That's a really important question. And I have been incredibly lucky with my illustrators. If you look at even just the covers of my books, such talented illustrators, but I didn't choose them.
Oh.
If you're traditionally published, the publisher chooses them. I have always been asked my opinion, and I've given my opinion. In one case, if I didn't choose that person, the book would be delayed by a season.
Wow.
So, that obviously influenced my decision also.
Mm-hmm. Was that?
I don't know if people are always asked or not, but I've been lucky enough to be asked and then to have these amazing illustrators.
Yeah, they are extraordinary. And it does seem like there's a sort of connection between your books. The illustrations, at least from my point of view, seem to have a sort of similar feel to them, but they're not all the same illustrator?
No, two were the same illustrator. Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code, and Hedy Lamar's Double Life. Those were the same illustrator and the same publishing company. Mm-hmm. The other three are different illustrator. The one coming out next year is a different illustrator. My Dino Pajama Party is a very different illustrator because it's a different style. Mm-hmm. When my second book, Grace Hopper, and we were talking illustrators, and I tried to convince Meredith, who is here, so she knows this story. I said, how about if we use the same illustrator we used for Ada Byron Lovelace and the Thinking Machine? Because the illustrations are gorgeous. I love them. And Meredith, who is a wise editor, said, thank you. That's true. I guess I could hold the book up. I have them all right here, but thank you.
There we go.
Right. So I will hold up the illustrator we ended up with for the next book. So you can see a little bit different, because what Meredith said is the type of illustration that worked for Lord Byron's daughter in the 1800s is not going to be the same type of illustrator that's going to work for a computer scientist in World War II and above. And of course, she was right.
So that question was for you as well, Marjorie. Have you had the same experience with looking for illustrators?
Well, it's quite a complicated situation. I think what's happening in the field right now is that illustrators are more and more writing the stories themselves that they illustrate, so that you see a plethora of books that are written and illustrated by the same person. Now, to be a good picture book editor, you have to think visually, so that when a manuscript comes across your desk, you right away see the pictures in your own head as you're reading the manuscript. That's very important. And then you have, if you're a decent editor, I'm not saying I necessarily am, but the way I've always done it is I always have a vision of how the book should look. Then, I discuss it with the author so that we're both comfortable with the vision, and the author will often improve the vision or have some good ideas. And then I either go to an illustrator who I've seen, whose work I've seen because of other books that he or she has illustrated. I can go to, and often do go to, illustrators' agents, because they have just amazing websites where I can see different styles from different illustrators. So just as an author has an agent, an illustrator has an agent as well. And then on the internet, there's Instagram, there's Pinterest, there's, how do you pronounce that? Pinterest. Thank you. So there are all kinds of things you can do on the internet, just looking for new talent. And I have to say, in my career as an editor, I always was looking for new talent. I just loved finding people who hadn't ever thought of illustrating a book, because I'd seen their work in a magazine or newspaper or something, and then introducing them to children's books. So there are lots of different ways you find an illustrator.
I just want to make
though you don't want to have it's just like an author has to polish their work and work really hard to bring it up to a professional standard. Illustrators have to do that too. So often an amateur illustrator who's very talented isn't going to work as the illustrator of a book to be published, because they haven't polished their skills enough.
I want to say something, if there are any author illustrators out there, though, that when you're submitting your work, you need to think to yourself, is it okay if they accept just my words or just my illustrations? It either is or isn't. Obviously I can't answer to that, but you need to make that clear in your letter if you're willing to, separate the two and let someone just accept your words and have someone else illustrate it. Make that clear, because that might make the difference.
So that's something that happens. People will say, I want one, but not the other.
Right. That does happen.
Okay. Interesting. There are a couple of questions here in the queue that have to do with the writing process, others that have to do with, what particular things you were doing with this book. So I'm going to start with something that's closer to process, and then we'll move over to some specific information about the book.
Okay.
So one question is how you balance history and the science when you're trying to put so much into one small text. If you're trying to do two things at the same time, to get history in there and then get sort of scientific knowledge in there, or do they not feel like different things to you at all?
Okay, so I mentioned I did a webinar last weekend. It was about writing biography. And part of the webinar was finding an approach. And I think I had 16 different approaches to doing things. And this is what you're talking about, is, how you get these things together. What are you focusing on? How you're doing it. I would have said, I'm not a history person. I'm not especially interested in history. I did well in history because I was good at memorizing, which is what history was when I was in school. But it turns out that the science is a product of the history. And getting back to Marjorie's question about feminism, that becomes very important. In my book, Numbers in Motion, she was Russian. She wanted to study math in Germany, which at that time was the center of mathematical research and thought. And she could only leave the country with her father or her husband. And her father wasn't doing it, so she participated in a sham marriage. So it becomes really intertwined with, she wants to learn more math. This is what she's going to do it, participate in a sham marriage. I'm not sure that really answered the question.
Well, I think in some ways it does. I mean, the science is what drives you, but in order to tell these stories about how women achieved their scientific knowledge and brilliance,
right,
tell about what they had to go through in order to get there.
Right, even in Codebreaker Spy Hunter. Whoops, can't hear you, Marjorie. Try it again.
Okay, I was going to say, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was going to say, with the first draft, you're usually wrestling with this problem of science and history, and your first drafts can be very long, and then it's a question of shedding till you get right down to the most essential component. And so that's why writers revise all the time, especially if they're writing fiction, because the challenge of writing nonfiction for a picture book is how to get rid of a lot of the words in your first draft.
Mm-hmm.
I actually outline my books, even my fiction picture books. Again, left brain, this is just my process. So picture book biography I'm working on right now that Marjorie has seen in the critique group, the outline was over 2,000 words. Clearly way too long, and as we got along, I've thrown out, don't really need that, that can go in the back matter, who cares about this? It really is that process of pruning and getting down to the essential essence of the person and the person's accomplishments.
Makes sense. I feel like I can put two questions together here in relation to that, which is one person wondering about whether there were facts you've had to leave out of this book or another that you wish you could have kept in. And somebody else wondering if whether you might try your hand at a middle grade novel again. Maybe there's a subject out there that has so much going on you feel like you can't.
Okay, so I am actually working on a middle grade / YA, novel in verse.
Oh, cool.
But it is a biography. So I've gone a little out of my lane, but not far out of my lane.
Yeah.
I suspect having written 2 middle grade books that went nowhere. Well, okay. One did go somewhere. Just like I had an agent for a day, one of the books was picked up, was going to be published, and the publishing company went out of business. I doubt I'll write a straight middle grade novel at this point, but I love writing novels in verse. And I can see doing another one after this one I'm working on now.
Yeah.
And I forgot the first half of the question.
Yeah, it's all right. We're in a good spot. We did get a couple of questions just about the process of this particular novel. One that was from somebody who was a retired Canadian Naval Intelligence officer.
Wow.
And wanted you to know that although Elizebeth might not have been well known in the world in general, that she was well known in the crypto community.
And at the time she was well known.
Yeah.
And then we just sort of forgot her.
Sure. Yeah. So he was curious whether while you were doing research, did you run up against any sort of intelligence obstacles? Were there things you wanted to find out that the intelligence community wouldn't tell you?
Actually, no. All of her papers and photographs and things like that are stored at the Marshall Archives. It's down in Virginia. And a big shout out to librarians everywhere, because you could look at the archives yourself. Well, over the internet, I looked at the archives, but there were some questions I just couldn't figure out, and the librarian there, helped me. In other cases, there's been a mismatch between different sources of a date something happened, and the librarian was able to dig down further and get that information. But no, by the time I was writing, her stuff had been declassified. So it was all available.
Yes.
Really? I think it was all available. Let's put it that way. Maybe it wasn't, but I don't know.
Right. But there was nothing you wanted to know that you couldn't get a hold of.
No.
Got it. Very cool. Were there things that you found difficult in trying to aim at the age group you wanted to address? Things that you wanted to talk about you couldn't because this book was sort of geared for a particular age?
When I was in grad school, not computer grad school, but I also got an MFA in writing for children and young adults. Hello, people out there who were in my class. I know you're out there. I wrote my thesis on how to explain technical information in picture books. So all these different methods to do it. That being said, it's tough. Sometimes, some things are easier than others. Kids know what a computer is, but sometimes you're writing about things that kids really do not know about. And you have to give enough information. In my Numbers in Motion, Sophie Kovalevsky, Queen of Mathematics, I actually used the term partial differential equations in the text.
That's great.
I then go on to say, these are used to explain natural phenomena like, I can't remember now, waves and motion or whatever. But I needed to use that technical term in the text because this was her work. And it would be a disservice to not use the term. But in the back matter, I go into much more depth into what these partial differential equations were. Because the back matter you can write at a higher level.
Very cool. Have you ever run into that yourself, Marjorie? Things that your books sort of tended towards that seemed like they didn't quite?
No, because my books are, I'm 5 years old inside.
Wonderful.
I don't complicated subjects. I write about things that excited me when I was 5 and still excite me, like skeletons, or I'm crazy about skeletons, as you have probably figured out.
Yep.
Things like that. So I don't have that challenge of trying to make something complicated simple and age appropriate. I just go inside myself to that 5-year-old kid and write what excites that 5-year-old kid. And so, and my stories tend to be fictional anyway, and usually humorous.
But that's a really good point, that we're writing for children. I'm not saying we're writing down because we're writing for children. I would never do that. But we need to find children where they are, what interests them. When you're giving comparisons, how long something is, it has to be something a child would know.
Yeah. Well, I feel
it's a privilege to write for children because you're actually building the inner architecture. You're contributing to building the inner architecture of a child.
That's right.
So it's a privilege.
I agree. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, these books will live inside children's heads and reemerge often when they have grown up and are having children themselves, and they'll pull those things out and put them in front of new children. And it's an amazing thing that children.
And I just want to do a shout out that picture books are not just for little children.
Yeah.
I mean, mine tend to be older anyway, but even what you think of as classic picture books, older kids like them too.
Mm-hmm.
They enjoy the rhythm of the words. They enjoy looking at the pictures. Ones who are having a little bit more difficulty reading, it lets them have the story.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I still love them, and I'm 44, so.
It's just a great editorial in the New York Times written by Pamela Paul about how picture books are for all ages forever and ever and ever. It was a very eloquent editorial, very well articulated.
Mm-hmm. Well, then we should make sure that everybody gets a copy of this book. Take a look at Marjorie's work again, and that we keep on recognizing these gorgeous children's books for what they are, which is really, an immensely important part of our culture from birth all the way on up to people who are working on them and writing them and reading them and to their own children. Thank you so much, both of you. This was really an incredible conversation.
Well, thank you for having us.
So one more mention to everybody that we were hearing about Laurie's book, Codebreaker, Spy Hunter, How Elizebeth Friedman finish the title for me.
Changed the course of 2 world wars.
There we go. So you should check it out. Take a look at Marjorie Kyler's work if you don't already know it. It was wonderful having you both here. Thank you so much.
Oh, I just want to do one
and
other
hooray
thing.
Without Labyrinth. God, for wonderful booksellers like yourself and wonderful bookstores that champion children's books.
Yes.
Really, we can't do enough.
And if any of you out there are writers, especially children's writers, if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I do a Kidlit link of the day. And it's usually craft, but sometimes it's marketing or business. Just articles that I have found interesting that I think other people will find interesting. So.
Great. That's very helpful. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that you showed up.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.